So, Digimon Fusion. A season I already talked about. Perhaps a little too much, but not as much as Zero Two. It's been 10 years since the dub came out, and still no sign of the Hunters arc getting a dub. In all seriousness, it seems that Toei and Bandai want to move on from this season's dub as much as possible, considering that they have dubbed later seasons and movies. For a while now, I have been thinking about touching up my Digimon seasonal reviews. Not necessarily a full-on remaster, but rather one big compilation, removing all of the Shareverse lore bits and replacing it with some added details that would either enhance the reviews or correct some errors. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how there's a lot I want to talk about with some seasons and not with others. Addressing how Brian Donovan didn't play Jordan and Oban as I mistakenly claimed in my Zero Two review, and how I failed to bring up Serial Experiments Elaine in my Tamers review. Like, at all. But there's not a lot of things I could add to seasons like Frontier, Data Squad, or Adventure. But Fusion, on the other hand, I wanted to explore more as to why the season is a black sheep in the Digimon dub family. It also adds more intrigue when you consider that Bandai has gave it an odd post-life. With everything I wanted to say in my first video, it would only be a distraction to the compilation, if I ever made it. So this video will be discussing why Digimon Fusion is a strange dub, why it never took off, and who was the one that never gave it a chance in America. It should be noted that while Fusion didn't do well in America, over in Japan, Cross Wars also had a difficult time finding success. When the 6th Digimon season came out, ratings were not that great in 2010. Maybe it was because of what was going on in Japan, but it appeared that the franchise was doomed to fail. A washed-up has-been jumping the shark to try something new, because that worked so well last time. Despite the TV ratings, Bandai's merchandise did super well, especially when it leaned into the combiner elements of the anime. But one piece of merchandise stood out, and in truth, helped the season grow its audience: the Crossloader. Unlike previous Digivices that stored one virtual pet, the higher-end Crossloader stored multiple Digimon and had various ways of building your army. The most prevalent came from a built-in recording device, and this feature helped the show in the Death General's arc. In the first arc, every episode ended with an extensive analysis of a Digimon that appeared in the anime. In the Death General's arc, each analysis now has a soundbite of the Digimon's data. If viewers recorded the sound on their loader, they would get that Digimon installed. This was a genius way of audience participation, and it helped get the season back on its feet. Now, do you really think Bandai America would give us this crossloader? No, of course not. Not when the ratings were god-awful and what little merchandise we got went straight to clearance. Instead, we got the lower-end fusion loaders, where one was a regular virtual pet, and the other was a plastic toy that could be used to play the cards, which were also compatible with an app game that was made in a matter of hours and cheaply produced. So instead, the dub just talks about the Digimon without any sound effects. But Mikey refers to the analysis as a melody, implying that a music cue was supposed to play, but it never happens. I'm assuming we were supposed to get the higher-end fusion loader in the States, but once the first season bombed, they backed out on it. In fact, in the later analysis, Mikey actually talks more about the Digimon instead of awkwardly waiting in silence. But even if the recording device did come to America, the odds of an American kid waiting almost a year for the show to come back, now realizing that episodes end with a soundbite for their loader that they probably haven't touched in a year and a half, would be hypothetically low. It's just another example of the laziness and consistency with the dub, leading to the merchandise dissolving fast in America. Not even the All-Star Rumble game made its way over to Japan, nor was it made by them. And I don't think anybody played the mobile game since nobody talked about it, especially when the American-made cards were needed. Speaking of cards, the official trading card game has been well in America, I think. I never got around to actually playing a match. It is really respectful to people who grew up with the dub, however. It retains the English terminology, American names for the human characters, and some Digimon, which means we still get Creepymon, so yeah. But when it comes to localizing fusion stuff, things get funny. Not only do they refer to the season as Cross Wars, but Fusion Fighters is back to being Crossheart, and character names have been reverted to their originals. No more Mikey and Christopher. Taiki and Kiara are back on the menu. And outside of the trading card game, Bandai has gone so far to rename Cross Wars again. In some cases, the series has been referred to as Fusion Battles. Kind of a weird addition since they only added one word to the title, and they're not hiding the cross angle anymore. Maybe it's because they just don't have the full rights to the dub, or maybe they want to disassociate themselves from it as much as possible. I've already discussed at length why I believe Digimon Fusion is a terrible dub, from needlessly changing character personalities, inconsistent names for certain forms and modes, inconsistent censorship, censoring things that were never censored in previous seasons, gaslighting the audience about the nationality of their characters, and making random shit up for no reason other than they could in the dub without explaining what the new shit is. It also didn't help that Nickelodeon did everything in their power to make the show inaccessible for people trying to either watch the damn show or becoming a new fan. A terrible time slot on the main channel, accidentally airing the first episode instead of the pivotal third episode, not airing that episode again because of the worldwide day of play, getting a bad time slot on Nicktoons, eventually airing 2 episodes a week, not airing the Dark Generals arc for almost a year, barely any advertisements, no Hunter's dub, and an atrocious DVD release with the second arc being borderline inaccessible to get. And no, I still don't have a copy myself. That song and dance has been said before, so the question I would like to explore now is, why was Nickelodeon so adamant of not giving Digimon a chance on their channel? And were they really the ones to send the show to the gallows as soon as it aired? Personally, I still hold the belief that Nickelodeon were the ones that failed Fusion, and enforced Saban to comply with their rules if they wanted the show to air. Nick doesn't have the best track record of taking care of their shows that's not SpongeBob, and we've seen them throw out penalties against creators of their shows, casually canceling projects if a creator so dares to act out of their authority. And when Fusion wasn't up to snuff, they used their tricks to purge it from everyone's minds. Take a look at Digimon's American older brother, Power Rangers, which did see success in bringing the franchise back, but the attention for it died down quickly, and it also didn't help that the 2017 reboot movie bombed critically and financially. But the standards that they imposed to the Rangers included the decision to split the seasons in half. Instead of 40 episodes of one season that would air throughout the year, now one season aired 20 episodes per year, giving the second half the forename Super, and making the series lag behind its Sentai counterpart by several years. And with the state of the franchise, who knows if it's coming back? All of these issues spiraled from Nickelodeon's watch over Saban. The seasons from this era ranged from being fine to the worst the series has to offer. Toy sales didn't cut it, and the show was airing in the same time frame as Fusion, Saturdays at noon, which just makes it more confusing because Nickelodeon had a Saturday morning block of their shows. Why couldn't they just move the Saban shows earlier in the day? That way it could pair up with other hit shows, such as Sanjay and Craig, The Raving Rabbits. I don't know anything. At the very least, older Ranger seasons did air on Nicktoons to generate more hype for the series, including some of the Disney seasons. But those were sparse, spread out throughout its time on the channel. Nick only aired reruns of Adventure and Zero Two side by side throughout the summer of 2013, never bothered airing Tamers, and by November, Nick stopped airing reruns altogether. By that point, Fusion was still at the beginning of its dub, so all of the hype Nick had for Digimon dissipated by the end of the year. Compare that to Disney's handling of the series. Frontier was one of the main shows when Jetix first started. Sure, they were reruns from the UPN, but they still promoted the show nonetheless. They also had marathons and special events. They even dubbed the other movies for Zero Two, Tamers, and Frontier. When Data Squad got its dub, they still promoted it, and Frontier got second wind through syndication right before Jetix kicked the bucket. Sure, it wasn't as big as Power Rangers, but Disney still acknowledged the other big IP that Saban owned. Nick, on the other hand, nope. Personally, I think it has something to do with one thing Nickelodeon prioritizes on: control. Sure, they aired a Digimon, but it wasn't like they bought the rights from Bandai. Power Rangers uses footage from Super Sentai not owned by Nick, but it's Saban who writes the story around the Japanese series, often not telling the same story. Plus, Power Rangers is a live-action show. Nick can still influence what Saban can do with their actors and sets, unlike Digimon where everything was already animated. In comparison, another major franchise Nick bought at the start of the decade was the Ninja Turtles. And they definitely had a bias. 2 new series, 2 movies, and they aired the 2003 series on Nicktoons, respecting people who grew up with that series. Not to mention, they were likely responsible to release the rest of the 87 series on home video and the Turtles Forever film. But the reason why Nick gave the Turtles so much stuff was because Nick had total control. They literally bought the rights to the franchise, which is why Leonardo can appear right next to SpongeBob and other original Nicktoons characters in crossovers, but not Agumon, Shoutmon, or any of the 20 Red Rangers. To Nick, Saban was seen as a lease, an asset to keep around in hopes of squeezing some change through minimal ratings. Once the well was dry, they were happy to throw them away. They could only dictate the rules Saban must comply with and how Nick promotes their shows, i.e. not even trying at all, and virtually no control over the story. I feel that frustrated Nick by having Saban not run with their full script. Therefore, Digimon was punished onto Nicktoons with a bad time slot and hopefully forgotten within a year or so. But even still, if Nick wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible, why hold off airing the Dark General's arc for almost a year? It's because of these many disadvantages the series was not able to gain a proper following, making it a challenge for new fans to get into the series. But the thing is, Nick can find success with anime airing on Nicktoons, and there was no reason to pretend that it couldn't happen when the previous anime they aired was fucking Dragon Ball! Nickelodeon's treatment of Dragon Ball Z is so baffling because they could have done the same thing for Fusion and opted not to. Contrary to disbelief, Nick's airing of Dragon Ball Kai was almost faithful to its uncensored counterpart. They were not afraid to show the dismemberment, death, and violence the show depicted. Some things were changed, of course. Certain dialogue regarding death being altered, blood was almost always blacked out, and there was no way Nick was going to show 16's head getting crushed. But when characters got hurt, they got hurt. And when characters died, characters died. No other dimension bullshit needed. But Kai on Nicktoons was a great way to introduce new fans into Dragon Ball, mainly because Nick gave it a great time slot. It aired on weekdays at prime time, where episodes didn't air too late in the night. That way, kids could watch it before going to bed and talk amongst themselves about it the next day at school. This was great for people my age that wanted to get into the series, but were perhaps too young to watch the original Z anime when it was airing on Toonami. Until kids realized they could either watch Z's anime, read the manga, or play the countless video games to know what happens next. It was effective while it lasted. Oh, and Nick also aired some of the Z movies, including Broly, and all of GT, just for the shits. Unfortunately, Digimon didn't get the same treatment. While Adventure and Zero Two aired prime time on weekdays, unlike Kai airing one episode a week, these episodes aired every weekday night, meaning it was a lot harder to keep up with either season if you missed out on one or two nights. And it only got worse when they started to air 2 episodes of Zero Two on Fridays, making it a requirement to watch the show every night, considering Zero Two's pacing being all over the place. I had to abuse the hell out of my family's DVR to make sure I didn't miss out. Now you can make the argument that the DVD box sets were already released, so even if you missed an episode, you could buy the box set and watch the series there. But that's a flimsy excuse, since Dragon Ball had several options to watch Z if you weren't watching Kai, and Kai's Blu-ray releases were coming out consistently and uncensored. So it didn't matter if you were watching it on DVD or on TV. And plus, those box sets for Digimon are pretty pricey, not for nothing. These days, it depends on where and when Digimon shows up on streaming services. Most frequently, it's on Hulu, which I find really funny and ironic that I could watch the series on Disney Plus through the Hulu bundle, cause, Shareverse, Disney Finding Evolution. And when the dub for the Adventure reboot came out, instead of airing on Cartoon Network, which I theorized, the dub was instead dumped in its entirety on the Microsoft Store. I bet nobody saw that coming. So even though I have brought up so many reasons to believe Nickelodeon almost killed the Digimon IP in America, let's say you don't think they're 100% responsible. You believe there was an accomplice to Nick in ruining Fusion. And that's a valid assumption, because you can reasonably make the connection that Saban themselves self-sabotaged Cross Wars, and that outcome was almost dire for the dub and the franchise's American fans. You might ask yourself, why would Saban try to ruin their own series? What benefit would they gain? And honestly, I can't tell you. Maybe they themselves were embarrassed of the series and wanted to lock it up. A viable theory is that Saban by this point clearly didn't care about the product. Whether it be the lazy, inconsistent censoring in Fusion, or not even bothering to cover up or elaborating the appearances of Sentai-only teams in Super Megaforce. The so-called Neo-Saban era was not a return to form that people hoped for. Rather, this era was a strong emphasis on making whatever, whenever, and cheap on the dime. Added to the theory for why Fusion's dub is the way it is, was that it was Saban's way to promote their new Saturday morning block. In 2012, Saban purchased the Saturday morning block on CW that was once held by 4Kids. They named it Vortex, and it acted like the combination of both Fox Kids and Kids WB from the early 2000s. They kept some of these shows from 4Kids around, including Sonic X, but Fusion was planned to be an e-ticket show for the block. In fact, Saban announced Fusion on Vortex months before Nickelodeon even announced Digimon coming to Nicktoons. And Fusion having a bad dub with bad censoring was because Saban preemptively made a dub able to be on Nicktoons and Vortex. I don't know the logistics of how cartoons airing on certain channels work, but supposedly, Saturday morning blocks have stricter guidelines than regular cartoon channels like Nick. especially when it comes to anime. Case in point, 4Kids in their infamous edits in their dubs. The more notorious changes to Kai came from the show airing on CW4Kids Toonzai, later Vortex, and not from Nicktoons. This is where Blue Mr. Popo actually comes from. Maybe Saban knew about the changes Dragon Ball had to deal with, and decided to make a version of Fusion that could be used for both channels. That way, they wouldn't have to bother making two versions of the same show and ultimately cheap out on it. I'm guessing this is also why the DVD release keeps the dub censored. But by running on that logic, it's embarrassing to not only compare Fusion to the other shows airing on Vortex, but also to Saban's previous resume. Vortex had reruns of Justice League Unlimited, where you're guaranteed a quality product from the DC animated universe with good storytelling and characters. For some unexplained reason, the first Power Rangers season to air on Vortex was not Samurai, but a rerun of Lost Galaxy, the season known as Starship Troopers for Kids with a lot of dark moments and imagery, the season with one episode that pays homage to Alien, the season known for killing one of the Rangers on screen and stayed dead until the finale. And yet Fusion is supposedly on the same quality and standards as Lost Galaxy? You're gonna look me dead in the eye and say that Fusion's censored Leilomon is on par with Trakina? Yeah, okay. And even though it was censored to hell and back, you were still getting the Dragon Ball Z experience when watching Kai on Vortex, even if they censored the most baffling things, like removing 18 kissing Krillin. No joke. Now, another show that aired on both Vortex and Nicktoons was Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, but because I am not invested in the series as I am with Digimon, I don't know if there was any controversies within the dub community the same way as it was with Fusion. I cannot speak on that behalf, I'd just want to bring it up if anyone says anything in the comments. But it's even disheartening, disgraceful, and unworthy to be called a Digimon season when compared to the other season's dubs. The reason why Digimon was seen as the gold standard for anime dubs on Saturday mornings in the 2000s was that it took itself and its audience seriously. Sure, many characters cracked one-liners and puns, and the music was, well, not as good as the subs. But when things needed to be serious, Saban understood the assignment. 02 still keeps the darker elements. They don't shy away from the fact that Ken saw his brother die, or that Cody's dad died on the job. Frontier still keeps Koichi in a near-death coma that helps the others in spirit and is pronounced dead in the finale. Adventure still keeps Matt and TK's messy family relationship, Izzy being adopted, and that Venom Myotismon appears during the Mark of the Beast. Data Squad has several moments that feel like a direct translation of the original script for Digimon Savers, right down to the names and power levels. And of course, Tamers got away with so much. Rika's parents being divorced, everything relating to Jerry, Impmon's actions as Beelzemon and his redemption arc, and the entire D-Reaper arc being shown on American televisions less than a year after 9/11. All of these things remained untouched or slightly altered in the dub. It's for these reasons why the anime is still positively praised for handling serious subjects for a pre-teen demographic, keeping all of these things in the dub and not pretending that the characters aren't Japanese, which only makes Fusion look bad in comparison, barely committing to keep up with the standards imposed from the previous seasons. Speaking of which, I noticed that other countries also use this version of Cross Wars with the same soundtrack and script as America, which makes it even worse when comparing it to their dubs of previous seasons. In other countries, Digimon is shown to be more faithful to the subs, often being uncensored, keeping the original Japanese soundtrack, and at times having full-on covers of insert songs. So with other countries having to bend the knee to Fusion, it leads into the impression that Saban really wanted to ruin Digimon for everyone. And if Fusion's censorship being a shit job was only made for Saturday mornings, well, Saban sure as hell barely committed to that too. Even though it was announced before being on Nick, Fusion didn't make its way to Vortex until 2014, months after the show moved to Nicktoons. And the real kicker is that it didn't even last a year on Saturday mornings, since Vortex was closed down by the FCC in September. Yes, the federal government got involved. So by the time Nick decided to release the Dark Generals arc in 2015, Vortex was already gone. And if Saban is truly responsible for the censoring, they should have spent that time to go back and re-edit Fusion so that it could be more suitable with Nick's lesser limitations. In fact, in a way, you can kinda see that in the Dark Generals arc, where some marks and bruises are left in the fights. So maybe Saban did make another version of this arc, only after Vortex crashed and burned. It still doesn't excuse Christopher not having blood all over his face, only to then black the blood out during the transformation sequence, when you could have clearly used the cleaner version that appeared in other episodes. But they didn't do that, because they were lazy. And that's the best word to describe it. Laziness. Not for greed, but because Saban just stopped caring. What a pathetic way for Digimon to have its end on American television. The problem with Fusion is that it's a bad dub, but it didn't have to be. If you believe in the theory that Saban was the ones who made the dub terrible, it still doesn't exclude Nickelodeon's terrible business practices of not giving the show a chance on their channels, ultimately hiding it from the public and releasing the final episodes without notice after several months of the show being on hiatus. Even with a bad dub, there's still a chance that Fusion would have garnered new fans to the series, had it not been for Nick not giving it the time of day. But maybe it could also be the fault of the season at its core. While I think Cross Wars is a fine season, brought down by a terrible dub, most people think that it's the worst from the original 6 seasons. Dull, generic main characters, a relatively safe story that featured another gimmick-focused Digivolution system, the fused Digimon designs looking like meshed toys, and everyone agrees that Hunters was an unnecessary extension, with an unlikable new main character and a botched anniversary crossover. I can't even imagine how that would look in the dub. Getting a bunch of different voice actors for the legacy characters, censoring Chohaikamon, my beloved. But despite its many flaws, Fusion shockingly has consistent quality. The voice actors for the dub were not just random nobodies on a shoestring budget. These were, and are, some of the best voice actors in the voiceover community. There was budget put into this. The only thing that kept Fusion down was a bad script and poor advertising. Not even Shoutmon winning an election against Rob Dyrdek could help save the show's reputation. And it's for those reasons Bandai has washed their hands clean of this dub, acting like it never happened. After Saban sold their rights, the Rangers were bought out by Hasbro, but even that couldn't save the series, which is now in a state of limbo alongside its Sentai counterpart. And even though Digimon's story in the television world has ended, we still have gotten dubs outside of it. Aside from the Adventure reboot getting dumped, Ghost Game is following suit, presumably dropping on the Microsoft Store too.
Oh.
The re-release of Digimon World's Next Order got an English dub, alongside the new Time Stranger game. We got dubs for all of the Tri movies, alongside Last Evolution, even a sub and dub for 02 the beginning releasing on the same day. And we have been getting remasters for the older movies, restored to their original lengths with a new English dub featuring many of the original voice actors. So the series has truly retained their footing in the Western anime market. It's just a shame that Fusion was at the absolute rock bottom of the series when it could have been so much better. Unfortunately, it has gotten to the point where Bandai is embarrassed to acknowledge its existence. Even though we'll probably never know who really was behind the terrible decisions for Fusion's dub, both in and outside of the show, we should take it as a lesson that 1. Nickelodeon is a greedy company that no one should ever do business with, and 2. The negligent and careless actions of a studio who was lazy for many decisions that cared less about the product and audience and more on how much money they hoped to gain. Who knows, now that Saban is gone, maybe Bandai wants to take another crack at Cross Wars, give it a more respectful dub, less censorship, and probably dropping it on a streaming service or two. The problem is whether Saban still owns the rights to the dub, or if they sold it to someone else. It might happen, it might not. But that is just the fate of Digimon Fusion, the worst English dub. If you liked the video, like and subscribe. With that, I'm AJ, and I'm sorry, I still can't get over what is the point of the F in Shoutmon x7F Superior Mode. It doesn't even show up on the screen. Where's the F? What does the F stand for? It's almost as bad as DX. What does it mean? What does it mean?